Happy Pride Month.
Happy Gay Month, because you know you gay and stuff.
It's Pride Month, so let's make some homophobes angry by existing, shall we? If you not limp-wristed, this is an AB conversation, so see your way into learning something. Alright, let's go. Through the media, My Government Means to Kill Me by Rashid Newson, and then he sang a lullaby by Anikayode, Small Joys by Elvin James Mensah, and the TV show Pose, created in part by Stephen Canals, Janet Mock, and Our Lady J. We see that even with mounting challenges due to intersectional oppression and intercommunal conflict throughout the decades, community continues to save queer lives and honor queer legacies through its encouragement of group perseverance, mutual sacrifice, and communal organizing. We're dissecting a lot of books and show scenes today, so if you remember any key details that I don't, remind everybody in the comment section, please. So, what lessons can these fictional works teach us about real community that we can implement into our daily lives to create healthier environments for our queer friends and family? Stay tuned and find out. Trigger warning. Brief discussion of fictional self-unaliving attempt and disadvantages of life with HIV/AIDS. Also, I'm going to go ahead and give out a spoiler warning for all of the media mentioned. This theme is in every story included in the introduction. Being in community with other marginalized people is especially important for people who identify as queer. There is strength in numbers and intracommunal reliance. One poignant example of this is in the text My Government Means to Kill Me, where a lesbian named Angie runs a renegade home hospice for queer men dying from AIDS. I'm not lying about that being a real way that was quoted in an article. Like, these are cited. Check the description. In one portion of the novel, the main character Trey is called upon by Angie to carry a deceased AIDS victim named Walter on his back towards a public place, an employee that would deceive Walter's family into thinking that he died from a drug overdose rather than AIDS. That way, he would at least be afforded an honorable burial from his wealthy white family. During the AIDS crisis, due to mounting misinformation, many were afraid to be in contact with any person who carried the virus, alive or dead. This led to many AIDS victims being buried in unmarked graves by strangers wearing protective gear. A harrowing example of this mass disrespect of life is the burial of millions of people who passed away due to complications of this disease, being laid to rest on New York City's Hart Island in unmarked graves. This phenomenon is referenced in the TV show Pose, where characters Pretel and Blanca visit a similar island to add a personalized rock to a large pile of them used to honor the deceased who never received proper headstones.
And I wanted to throw him into the deep end of the water. The first day, normally he might be helping with the laundry, preparing lunch. I wanted him to just find himself having to really make a choice about how far are you going to go in service to this community. And so it's also picked up on the reality of the case that I think at one point in New York there was one funeral home that would even accept the bodies of men who had died of AIDS. And cremation was also something that just was like, well, that's what we're going to do with everybody because we're so afraid of this disease. And to have somebody who explicitly said that's not their wish, and so these people working there with Trey have to find a way to honor that, and they have to go to great lengths to honor that. But having your main character have to carry a dead body out of a building certainly makes the metaphor come alive.
All of that to say, during these times where HIV/AIDS survivors and victims were not respected in life or in death by what the show Pose often refers to as the mainstream, it was imperative as a queer person to be able to have some form of emotional, mental, and physical support system. It was a game of navigating a system designed to be poisonous to those in the LGBTQIA+ community. It's important to acknowledge that these same systems that allowed numerous queer figures to perish with no afterthought exist to this day under different aliases. It looks like a legal system that somehow allows for the banning of books due to them having any sort of queer positive content. Speaking of which, you should read Vagabonds by Aloha Sausunde. I love how that's just like casually sitting behind me. LOL. Anyways, it looks like a medical system that makes bare minimum healthcare inaccessible or economically disadvantageous to already disadvantaged sexual and racial minorities through unreasonable income limitations or straight up traumatizing for genderqueer patients. It looks like an education system that scrubs history classes of queer histories, even though the country was also built with the labor of queer people, with many of them being Black and queer, even if they weren't allowed to voice that out loud at the time. For these reasons, and numerous others that I do not have the time to include in this video, the encouragement of group perseverance as opposed to individual struggling is key. Or to those within the LGBTQIA+ community that feel like other group struggles just aren't their problem, liberation is a joint struggle. Who said that? Was that Lord? Hold on. I feel multiple people have said it now, but who said it first? Black feminist. It was Lord, wasn't it? Hold on, girl. Liberation is a joint struggle, even if I can't remember exactly who said that first, and my desperate attempt to Google it immediately is failing. I think it was Lord. We shall figure it out later in editing. Shout out you, James. Alrighty. There have been plenty of times where supporting my queer community members of varying identities has gotten tough. Oppression is not a weak nigga. He would have died already if he was. I stayed the course because their lives improving are my life improving. It also, looking back, has just made me a more empathetic and caring person. That is dangerous to capitalism and lovely for community building. You should try it too. Not to mention, I've gotten some of my closest, most reciprocal platonic relationships from this sort of communal caring when the other needed someone to lean on. That is what I think found family is, referencing another concept often used in the queer community. The people that choose a bit more difficulty over ease in order to ensure that their loved one is okay. It's a part of what I think it means to truly live in community. Mutual sacrifice. Speaking of which, actually, the main character of My Government Means to Kill Me, Trey, sacrifices his entire plausible fortune and middle-class exceptionalism by moving to New York City in order to fight for the things that he believes are right, and to live a life that he knows is his truth. Trey comes from a relatively well-off Black family with a nuclear structure that had offered him these things with the expectation that he continued to uphold homophobic, hypermasculine, and classist values that actively harm him and the people that he cares for. In America and the global West, we live in a society of capitalistic individualism utilized for the personal wealth and the ultimate benefit of the state. But what about us? What about making sacrifices for our mental and emotional health, for our future selves? It reminds me of the sacrifice made by the friends of the main character of Elvin Jane Mensah's Small Joys. Harley se quiere. Harley is a 20-year-old gay and mentally ill Ghanaian British man who was kicked out of his house by his overtly homophobic, harmfully religious Ghanaian father. Ooh, all the queer West Africans felt that. Harley is found mid-attempt by Muddy, a white male character who takes a keen interest in caring for him. Muddy brings him back to an apartment shared with numerous other characters that in the end provide Harley with community, gainful employment, and enough encouragement to continue living. This community of Harleys takes him in, quite literally out of nowhere because Muddy found him in a forest, and sacrifices a part of their already cramped living space to try and ensure the safety of this chronically depressed gay man. In response, Harley is built back up and ends up contributing back to this community, monetarily, emotionally, and physically through numerous acts throughout the book. This is what good community is made out of, folks. Many of these community members are white cis-het individuals that don't fully get Harley's struggle, but they do have enough empathy to listen long enough to create a supportive environment for him. The author, Mensah, makes it a point to keep the explicit mention of the love story to the final pages of the book, keeping the emphasis on the importance of community and healing through grief and sustaining mental stability throughout the work. Jesus! Another telling example of this is showcased in Pose when character Praytel and Blanca sacrifice their time and energy, both limited by HIV diagnoses, in a time with little to no medical resources, to put on an AIDS benefit, to fundraise and entertain patients with late-stage AIDS. They both organize their community to be able to put on these fundraisers and continue to sacrifice their precious human capital, a term we've discussed before, to protest against Blanca losing her salon to a transphobic white feminist, a TERF. And for the girlies that don't know what a TERF is, a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, real estate tycoon, and to protect grandmother figure Electra from incarceration for a crime that she did not commit, though she will be held responsible for because she's a Black trans woman. So, through these examples, we see that mutual sacrifice can often go hand in hand with community organizing. So, let's talk a bit more about that, shall we? Another way to think about intersectional communities of queer people saving lives indirectly is through the protection of livelihoods and financial stability under capitalism, a system that requires one to live, breathe, and eat work to survive and spend a minimum of $20 every single time that they step outside of their dwelling place. If they have one. Shout out to BlackRock and Wall Street for buying up entire blocks while simultaneously hiking the rent prices with companies like RealPage. Allegedly. With the protection of livelihoods thought in mind, I'm called back to that sequence from Pose where Pretel and Blanc are putting their extremely limited energy into putting on this HIV/AIDS benefit concert in order to raise money for treatment and to provide entertainment for these late-stage AIDS patients. Consider this with me. If one person who lives with HIV saves $229,800 in medical costs by avoiding an HIV infection, and that's backed by research done by the National Library of Medicine, do you not think that the intensive care debt that one AIDS survivor would have to pay would be financially devastating? That's one of the main reasons why this benefit is so important. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that community saves queer lives. It's not just figurative or tangential, it's literal too. Communities of people can solve problems like glaring debts, seemingly insurmountable for one person. Community organizing does not only present itself as a temporary solution to the corporate greed of medical corporations. Make healthcare free, please. Listen, look at me. Make healthcare free, please. People are dying. But it also helps alleviate issues related to bigoted violence. There's this stereotype that jokes are often made about on social media that centers that one friend that many queer people have had while being young in school that defended them from the taunts of bullies.
Playing tennis is not gay, and that's the only reason he wears those little shorts. He only got his ear pierced with me at Claire's because it was my birthday. He talks about boobs like all the time, okay? He talks about them. He only stands like that because he's nervous.
We laugh because that shit was funny, but that is the concept that I'm referring to on a slightly smaller scale. In Pose, we see this demonstrated by the queer rights group ACT UP's protests. They would come in swarms, having been harshly prepared for the beatings that they would need to endure, just like many other queer organizers from Nuisance My Government Means to Kill Me. I mean, they beat their own ass in private just to make sure that they wouldn't end up fighting back and creating scenes that the media could utilize to paint them, the victims of corrupt policy and social systems, as violent.
You tend to sort of need an armor if you find yourself working with people and there's a lot of loss involved. How do you endure that?
This isn't fiction either. This was real life. An article by Sarah Schulman, an AIDS historian and real-life member of ACT UP, states, ACT UP would do what Martin Luther King called self-purification. Clock that connection. 1, because Black movements inspire, and 2, because Blackness and queerness have always been intertwined. Or what ACT UP called nonviolent civil disobedience training, a process of questioning moral strength in whether they could withstand the violence being inflicted without retaliating.
Well, no, I mean, one of the things I wrote this book and it's we're talking about ACT UP and we're talking about the AIDS crisis in the 80s, but a lot of it applies to today. It can apply to like Black Lives Matter movement or any sort of social movement. And the thing I want to remind everybody, especially particularly young people, is that most of the great movements of our time came from young people who really didn't know what they were doing. They did not have a 10-year plan. They were trying to respond to the situations that were in front of them. And that's a valid way to go. I also want to remind people, because I think we've all sort of grown up with this idea from the classroom to the boardroom that everything should work like Robert's Rules of Order and be very sedate and calm. And this is messy work. An ACT UP meeting or a lot of meetings in the social movement, there's yelling, there's screaming. We have clashing ideas and we're gonna hammer it out. And then afterwards we're all gonna go out and get drinks. We can disagree passionately, but we also recognize we're on the same side of this. And we're not going to take it personally in that way where there becomes a real division between us. Some of the people who fought just the most fiercely were also deep friends.
These things, though arguably necessary to make trained activists that wouldn't mess everything up for everyone else, definitely had an effect on the mental, emotional, and very much physical health of those who simply wanted more freedom. Ciao. The things that must be done under capitalism to try and lead better lives are outrageous. Jesus. This is a gentle reminder that we are poor and need money. Please continue watching the video if you can't support the Patreon, and maybe we'll get an AdSense chunk of maybe 4 months. LOL. We also need to be able to buy more equipment. Because of y'all's support and our team's hard work, we were able to buy mics because y'all called me in lovingly and told me that my audio quality was basura, and pay the editor this month. Please continue enabling us to do this. Please. I love doing this. And here's a shout out to the patrons because they're so great and they fund all the things on the channel, so you should become a patron. Hallelujah. Shout out to our newest patron, Kevin O'Rourke. Speaking of mental and emotional health, there were times in many of the texts being analyzed today where queer characters are required to stay in community with people that they did not align with because they needed each other for some form of support. Trey, Newson's main character, needed his roommate, Gregory, for emotional and physical support with rent and organizing.
I remember being young, and normally, there are two things going for when you're young. You're kind of optimistic and you're beautiful, like you're at the height of your beauty. And those things are all sort of happening, but then there are inherent disadvantages for a lot of us. You don't have a lot of experience, you're not a great decision maker necessarily, and you don't have money. And I read a lot of books and I'm always sort of thrown when money doesn't come up. I'm like, well, how are we paying for this life?
Shegun, one of Kayode's main characters, only continued a romantic relationship with Tanko, his emotionally abusive love interest, because he had a glaring fear of being queer and alone in a country like Nigeria. Though Tanko could only sometimes muster emotional connection before turning into a shell that cared more about sexual relations than personal intimacy with him. So, when people are surrounded by environments that do not care for their well-being and are subjected to a possible lack of basic human necessities such as housing, food, and love, they choose the best options that they have, which can be either not so great or downright abusive. So what does it look like providing other options whilst being in community with queer people, especially those who are economically disadvantaged? Because living under capitalism, being economically disadvantaged is something that is effective across the board. Well, let's turn to the text. When Shegun was first defended by Julia, his university classmate, while being taunted by another man with a plátano the size of a pushpin, you bitch, he was grateful, and she became one of the people who made Shegun's day bearable. Shegun's special friend, Trevor, healed him with debate, humor, and leftist literature. So if you feel like it's situationally appropriate, use your voice, your presence, your personality. And that goes for everybody, queer or not. That is what it means to be in true community as well, not just that patronizing nonsense. It's the difference between an ally and an accomplice. Oh, I love y'all, because I have a movie I'm supposed to be at by 2:10, and now my shirt is wet. Anyways, with all of the possible problems that arise with humans existing around other humans, there's still a grand effect caused by the absence of community, which lends itself to the thesis of this video. Don't Cry For Me by Daniel Black explores what happens when the MC's father is unable to invest in his life and existence because it differs so greatly from his own black cis-het experience as a man rooted in patriarchal trauma. Though I won't go into graphic detail about the things that I had to read, there was a story of a boy clocked to be queer by other young boys in the rural community that the main character's father grew up in, and that boy is essayed and later unalived from causes related to the incident. When we're considering the lack of community that many queer people experience because of sexuality-related ostracization, I think it's important that we also consider trauma. This video is of course centering Black queer experiences, but let's talk just a bit about the communities that queer people are born into, because not everyone is queer. The type of deep-rooted trauma and just a cloxenty, because we're here, insecurity, because straight people be closeted too, straight people, that I described from Blacks Don't Cry For Me is the type of trauma that many non-queer community members carry every day. As seen in this text, that is deeply affecting to the queer people around them, but we can't solely put the blame on them, even when they are involved in homophobic activity, as the main character's dad was. Because it does a disservice of describing how structural homophobia actually is. We live in a society that centers the cis-het white experience in others or demonizes everything else. This violence is a logical consequence of the attitudes held towards people and concepts that are othered and demonized. Let nothing ever let us forget that as we build towards a world where that is not the case. Anyways, I'd hate to end a video during Pride Month talking about straight people, so let's go ahead and talk about some more queer shit before we leave. Even with mounting challenges due to intersectional oppression and intercommunal conflict throughout the decades, community continues to save queer lives and honor queer legacies through its encouragement of group perseverance, mutual sacrifice, and communal organizing. We've talked about it enough though. How about we go outside to be with community, huh? That's where I've been. Which is one reason why I'm now trying to uphold a bi-monthly schedule instead of a monthly one. Also, capitalism does in fact persist, and unfortunately so does paying my bills. So I have a full-time job even during the summer. Please continue to support the Patreon and consider joining if you haven't. Speaking of patrons, one more shout out to our newest one, Kevin O'Rourke. Come on. Roll the clap, applause, glitter, diamonds. All right. Our existing patrons will get some play at the end of the vid. In conclusion, and I know I'm not supposed to say that in an essay, but this is my channel. So, in conclusion, let this video be a reminder that all oppressions are interlinked. Free Congo, free Palestine. I have victoriously completed another video. And until the next one, bye.